Okay, Dragon Riders of Pern, Dragonflight. Prologue. Rukbat in the Sagittarian sector was a golden G-type star. It had 5 planets, 2 asteroid belts, and a stray planet that it had attracted and held in recent millennia. When men first settled on Rukbat's third world and called it Pern, they had taken little notice of the strange planet swinging around its adopted primary in a widely erratic elliptical orbit. For 2 generations, the colonists gave the bright red star little thought until the path of the Wanderer brought it close to its stepsister at perihelion. When such aspects were harmonious and not distorted by conjunctions with other planets in the system, the indigenous life form of the wandering planet sought to bridge the space gap between its home and the more temperate and hospitable planet. At these times, silver threads dropped through the Pern's skies, destroying anything they touched. The initial losses the colonists suffered were staggering. As a result, during the subsequent struggle to survive and combat this menace, Pern's tenuous contact with the mother planet was broken. To control the incursions of the dreadful threads, where the Pernese had cannibalized their transport ships early on and abandoned such technological sophistication as was irrelevant to this pastoral planet, the more resourceful men embarked on a long-term plan. The first phase involved breeding a highly specialized variety of a life form indigenous to their new world. Men and women with high empathy ratings and some innate telepathic ability were trained to use and preserve these unusual animals. These dragons, named for the mythical Terran beast they resembled, had 2 valuable characteristics. They could get from one place to another instantaneously, and, after chewing a phosphine-bearing rock, they would emit a flaming gas. Because the dragons could fly, they were able to char thread in mid-air and then escape from its ravages. It took generations to develop to the fullest the potential of these dragons. The second phase of the proposed defense against the deadly incursions would take even longer, for Thread, the space-traveling mycorrhizoid spore with mindless voracity, devoured all organic matter and, once grounded, burrowed and proliferated with terrifying speed. So, a symbiote of the same strain was developed to counter this parasite, and the resulting grub was introduced into the soil of the southern continent. The original plan was that the dragons would be visible protection charring Thread while it was still skyborne and protecting the dwellings and the livestock of the colonists. The grub symbiote would protect vegetation by devouring any thread that managed to evade the dragon's fire. The originators of the 2-stage defense did not allow for change or for hard geological fact. The southern continent, overtly more attractive than the harsher northern land, proved unstable, and the entire colony was eventually forced to move north to seek refuge from the threads in the natural caves on the continental shield rock of the north. The original fort, constructed in the eastern face of the Great West mountain range, soon grew too small to hold the colonists. Another settlement was started slightly to the north alongside a great lake conveniently formed near a cave-filled cliff, but Ruath the Hold, as the settlement was called, became overcrowded within a few generations. Since the Red Star rose in the east, the people of Pern decided to establish a holding in the eastern mountains. Provided a suitable cave site could be found, only solid rock and metal both of which were distressingly short supply on Pern, were impervious to the burning score of thread. The winged, tailed, fire-breathing dragons had by then been bred to a size that required more spacious accommodations than the cliffside holds could provide, but ancient cave-pocketed cones of extinct volcanoes, one high above the first fort, the other in the bend in mountains, proved to be adequate and required only a few improvements to be made habitable. However, such projects took the last of the fuel for the great stone cutters, which had been programmed only for regular mining operations, not wholesale cliff excavations. Subsequent holds and weirs had to be hand-hewn. The dragons and their riders in the high places, and the people in their cave holds, went about their separate tasks, and each developed habits that became custom, which solidified into tradition, and incontrovertible as law. Then came an interval of 200 turns of the planet Pern around its primary, where the red star was at the other end of its erratic orbit, a frozen, lonely captive. No thread fell on Pern. The inhabitants erased the depredation of the thread and grew crops, planted orchards from precious seed brought with them, thought of reforestry from the slopes denuded by thread. They even managed to forget that they had once been in grave danger of extinction. Then threads fell again, when the wandering planet returned for another orbit around Pern, bringing 50 years of attack from the skies. The Pernese once again thanked their ancestors, now many generations removed, for providing the dragons who seared the dropping threads mid-air with their fiery breath. Dragonkind, too, had prospered during the interval, and had settled in 4 other locations, following the master plan of interim defense. The significance of the southern hemisphere and of the grub had been lost in the immediate struggle to establish new settlements. Recollections of Earth receded further from Pernese history with each successive generation until memory of their origins degenerated into legend or myth and passed into oblivion. By the third pass of the Red Star, a complicated socio-political economic structure had been developed to deal with this recurrent evil. The 6 weirs, as were old volcanic habitation of the dragonfolk were called, pledged themselves to protect Pern, each weir having a geographical section of the northern continent literally under its wing. The rest of the population agreed to tithe to support the weirs, since these fighters, these dragon men, did not have arable land in their volcanic homes. They could not afford to take time away from nurturing their dragons to learn other trades during peacetime, nor could they take time away from protecting the planet during passes. Settlements, called holds, developed wherever natural caves were found, some, of course, more extensive or strategically placed than others. It took a strong man to hold frantic, terrified people in control during threat attacks. It took a wise administration to conserve victuals when nothing could be safely grown, and it took extraordinary measures to control population and keep it productive and healthy until such time as the menace passed. Men with special skills in metalworking, weaving, animal husbandry, farming, fishing, mining, formed craft halls in each large hold, and looked to one master craft hall where the precepts of their craft were taught, and craft skills were preserved and guarded from one generation to another. One lord holder could not deny the products of the craft hall situated in his hold to others, since the crafts were deemed independent of a hold affiliation. Each craft master of a hall owed allegiance to the master of that particular craft, and elected a office based on proficiency in that craft and administrative ability. The master craftsman was responsible for the output of his halls and the distribution, fair and unprejudiced, of all craft products on a planetary rather than parochial basis. Certain rights and privileges accrued to different leaders of holds and masters of crafts, and naturally to the dragon riders, whom all Pernies looked to for protection during the Threadfall. On occasion, the conjunction of Rook-Bot's 5 natural planets would prevent the Red Star from passing close enough to Pern to drop its fearful spores. To the Pernies, these were long intervals. During one such interval, the grateful people prospered and multiplied, spreading out across the land, carved more holds out of solid rock just in case Thread returned. But they became so busy with their daily pursuits that they preferred to think that the Red Star had indeed passed beyond any danger to them. No one realized that only a few dragons remained to take the skies, and that only one weir of dragon riders was left on Pern. Since the Red Star wasn't due to return for a long, long time, if ever, why worry? Within 5 generations, the descendants of the heroic dragon men fell from disfavor, the legends of past braveries, and the very reason for their existence fell into disrepute. Then the Red Star, obeying natural forces, began to spin closer to Pern, winking with a baleful red eye on its ancient victim. Dear God, yes, there is a Virginia who helped me create this planet and the marvels thereon, and for whom I thank you. AMJ. Contents. Part 1, Weir Search. Part 2, Dragonflight. Part 3, Dustfall. Part 4, The Cold Between. Part 1, Weir Search. Drummer beat, and piper blow, harper strike, soldier go. Free the flame and sear the grasses till the dawning Red Star passes. Lessa woke, cold, cold with more than the chill of the everlasting, clammy stone walls, cold with prescience of danger stronger than the one 10 full turns ago that had then sent her, whispering with terror, to hide in the watchware's odorous lair. Rigid with concentration, Lessa lay in the straw of the redolent cheese room she shared as sleeping quarters with the other kitchen drudges. There was an urgency in the ominous portent, unlike any other forewarning. She touched the awareness of the watchware, slithering on its rounds in the courtyard. It circled at the choke limit of its chain. It was restless, but oblivious to anything unusual in the pre-dawn darkness. Lessa curled into a tight knot of bones, hugging herself to ease the strain across her tense shoulders. Then, forcing herself to relax, muscle by muscle, joint by joint, she tried to feel what subtle menace it might be that could rouse her and not distress the sensitive watchware. The danger was definitely not within the walls of Uratha Hold, nor approaching the paved perimeter without the hold, where relentless grass had forced new growth through the ancient mortar, green witness to the deterioration of the once stone-clean hold. That danger was not advancing up the now little-used causeway from the valley, nor lurking in the craftsman's stony holdings at the foot of the hold's cliff. It did not scent the wind that blew from Tilek's cold shores, but still twanged sharply through her senses, vibrating every nerve in Lessa's slender frame. Fully roused, she sought to identify it before the prescient mood dissolved. She cast outward toward the pass. Farther than she ever pressed, whatever threatened was not in Ratha yet, nor did it have a familiar flavor. It was not then Fax. Lessa had been cautiously pleased that Fax had not shown himself at Rothahold in 3 full turns. The apathy of the craftsmen, the decaying farmholds, Even the green-etched stones of the hold infuriated Vax, self-styled lord of the high reaches, to the point where he preferred to forget the reason he had subjugated the once proud and profitable hold. Relentlessly compelled to identify this oppressing menace, Lessa groped in the straw for her sandals. She rose, mechanically brushing straw from the matted hair, which she then twisted quickly into a rude knot at her neck. She picked her way among the sleeping drudges, huddled together for warmth, and glided up the worn steps to the kitchen proper. The cook and his assistant lay on the long table before the great hearth, wide backs to the warmth of the blanked fire, discordantly snoring. Lessa slipped across the cavernous kitchen to the stable yard door. She opened the door just enough to permit her slight body to pass. The cobbles of the yard were icy through the thin soles of her sandals, and she shivered as the pre-dawn air penetrated her patched garment. The watchware slithered across the yard to greet her, pleading, as it always did, for release. I lost my spot. Oh, there we go. Comfortingly, she fondled the creases of the sharp-tipped ears as it matched her stride. Glancing fondly down at the awesome head, she promised it a good rub presently. It crouched, groaning at the end of its chain as she continued to the grooved steps that led to the rampart over the hold's massive gate. Atop the tower, Lessa stared toward the east, where the stony breasts of the pass rose in black relief against the gathering day. Indecisively, she swung to her left, for the sense of danger issued from that direction as well. She glanced upward, her eyes drawn to the red star that had recently begun to dominate the dawn sky. As she stared, the star radiated a final ruby pulsation before its magnificence was lost in the brightness of Pern's rising sun. Incoherent fragments of tales and ballads about the dawn appearance of the red star flashed through her mind too quickly to make sense. Moreover, her instinct told her that, though danger might come from the northeast too, there was a greater peril to contend with from due east. Straining her eyes as if vision would bridge the gap between peril and person, she stared intently eastward. The watchware's thin, whistled question reached her just as the prescience waned. Lessa sighed. She had found no answer in the dawn. Only discrepant portents. She must wait. The warning had come, and she had accepted it. She was used to waiting. Perversity, endurance, guile were her only weapons. Were her other weapons, loaded with the inexhaustible patience and vengeful dedication. Dawnlight illumined the tumbled landscape, the unplowed fields in the valley below. Dawnlight fell on twisted orchards, where the sparse herds of milch beasts hunted stray blades of spring grass. Grass in Ruatha, Lessa mused, grew where it should not, died where it should flourish. Lessa could hardly remember now how Ruatha Valley had once looked, sweetly happy, amply productive, before Fax came. An odd brooding smile curved lips, unused to such exercise. Fax realized no profit from his conquest of Ruatha, nor would he while she, Lessa, lived, and he had not the slightest suspicion of the source of this undoing. Or had he, Lessa wondered, her mind still reverberating from the savage prescience of danger? West lay Fax's ancestral and only legitimate hold. Northeast lay little but bare and stony mountains on the weir that protected Pern. Lessa stretched, arching her back, inhaling the sweet, untainted wind of morning. A cock crowed in the stable yard. Lessa whirled, her face alert, eyes darting across the outer hold, lest she be observed in such an uncharacteristic pose. She unbound her hair, letting the rank mass fall about her face concealingly. Her body drooped into the sloppy posture she affected. Quickly, she thudded down the stairs, crossing to the watchware. It cried piteously, its great eyes blinking against the growing daylight. Oblivious to the stench of its rank breath, she hugged the scaly head to her, scratching its ears and eye ridges. The watchware was ecstatic with pleasure, its long body trembling, its clipped wings rustling. It alone knew who she was or cared. And it was the only creature in all Pern she had trusted since the dawn she had blindly sought refuge in its dark, stinking lair to escape the thirsty sword that had drunk so deeply of Ruathan blood. Good boy. Slowly she rose, cautioning it to remember to be as vicious to her as to all, should anyone be near. It promised to obey her, swaying back and forth to emphasize its reluctance. The first rays of the sun glanced over to the hold's outer wall, and crying out, the watchweir darted into its dark nest. Lessa crept swiftly back to the kitchen and into the cheese room. From the weir, and from the bowl, bronze and brown and blue and green, rise the dragon men of Pern, aloft on wing, seen, then unseen. I have to let my cat in. Falar on bronze, Nementh's great neck appeared first in the skies above the chief hold of Fax, so-called Lord of the High Reaches. Behind him, in proper wedge formation, the wingmen came into sight. Falar checked the formation automatically. It was as precise as on the moment of their entry to between. As Nementh curved into an arc that would bring them to the perimeter of the hold, consonant with the friendly nature of this visitation, Falar surveyed with the mounted aversion the disrepair of the ridge defenses. The firestone pits were empty, and the rock-cut gutters radiating from the pits were green-tinged with a mossy growth. Was there even one lord in Pern who maintained his rocky hold in observance of the ancient laws? Falar's lips tightened into a thinner line. When this search was over and the impression made, there would have been a solemn, punitive council held at the weir. And by the golden shell of the queen, he, Falar, meant to be its moderator. He would replace lethargy with industry. He would scour the green and dangerous scum from the heights of Pern. The grass blades from its stoneworks, no verdant skirt would be condoned in any farmhold, and the tithings that had been so miserly, so miserly, so grudgingly presented would, under pain of firestoning, flow with decent generosity into the dragon weir. Nementh's rumbling approved as he veined his pinion to land lightly on the grass-etched flagstones of Fax's hold. The bronze dragon furled his great wings, and Falar heard the warning klaxon in the hold's great tower. Nementh dropped to his knees as Falar indicated he wished to dismount. The bronze rider stood by Nementh's huge wedge-shaped head, politely awaiting the arrival of the hold lord. Falar idly gazed down the valley, hazy with warm spring sunlight. He ignored the the furtive heads that peered at the dragonmen from the parapet slits and the cliff windows. Flar did not turn as the rush of air past him announced the arrival of the rest of the wing. He knew, however, when Fëanor, the brown rider, who was coincidentally his half-brother, took the customary position on his left, a dragon length to the rear. From the corner of his eye, Fëanor glimpsed Fëanor twisting to death with his boot heel the grass that crowded up between the stones. An order, muffled to an intense whisper, issued from within the great court, beyond the open gates. Almost immediately, a group of men marched into sight, led by a heavy-set man of medium height. Nementh arched his neck, angling his head so that his chin rested on the ground. Nementh's many-faceted eyes, on a level with Fëanor's head, fastened with disconcerting interest on the approaching party. The dragons could never understand why they generated such abject fear in common folk. At only one point in his lifespan would a dragon attack a human, and that could be excused on the grounds of simple ignorance. Fëanor could not explain to the dragon the politics behind the necessity of inspiring awe in the holders, lord and craftsman alike. He could only observe that the fear and apprehension showing in the faces of the advanced squad, which troubled Nementh, were oddly pleasing to him, Fëanor. Welcome, Bronze Rider, to the hold of Fax, Lord of the High Reaches. He is at your service. And the man made an adequately respectful salute. The use of the third-person pronoun could be construed by the meticulous to be a veiled insult. This fit in with the information Fëanor had on Fax, so he ignored it. His information was also correct in describing Fax as a greedy man. It showed in the restless eyes that flicked at every detail of Fëanor's clothing, at the slight frown when the intricately etched sword hilt was noticed. Gotta scare the normies. Fëanor noticed in his own turn the several rich rings that flashed on Fax's left hand. The Overlord's right hand remained slightly cocked after the habit of the professional swordsman. His tunic, of rich fabric, was stained and none too fresh. The man's feet in heavy warehide boots were solidly planted, weight balanced forward on his toes. A man to be treated cautiously, Fëanor decided, as one should, the conqueror of 5 neighboring holds. Such greedy audacity was in itself a revelation. Fax had married into a 6th and had legally inherited, however unusual the circumstances, the 7th. He was a lecherous man by reputation. Within these 7 holds, Fëanor anticipated a profitable search. Let Ragul go southerly to pursue search among the indolent, if lovely, women there. The Weir needed a strong woman this time. Jorah had been worse than useless with Nemorth. Adversity uncertain. Those were the conditions that bred the qualities Fëanor wanted in a Weir woman. We ride in search, Fëanor drawled softly, and request the hospitality of your hold, Lord Fax. Book noises. Fax's eyes widened imperceptibly at mention of a search. I had heard Jorah was dead, Fax replied, dropping the third person abruptly as if Fëanor had passed some sort of test by ignoring it. So Nemorth has laid a queen, He continued, his eyes darting across the rank of the wing, noting the disciplined stance of the riders, the healthy color of the dragons. Pilar did not dignify the obvious with an answer. And, my lord, Vax hesitated, expectantly, inclining his head slightly toward the dragon man. For a pulse beat, Pilar wondered if the man was deliberately provoking him with such subtle insults. The name of the bronze rider should be well known throughout Pern as the name of the dragon queen and her weirwoman. Weirwoman. Yeah, we're reading a book, James. Welcome. We are reading Dragon Riders of Pern. Dragonflight. 1968. The name of the bronze riders should be as well known throughout Pern as the name of the dragon queen and her weirwoman. Pilar kept his face composed and his eyes on Fax. Leisurely, with the proper touch of arrogance, Fenora stepped forward, stopping slightly behind Nement's head, one hand negligently touching the jaw hinge of the huge beast. The bronze rider of Nement, Lord Valar, will require quarters for himself. I, Fenor, Brown Rider, prefer to be lodged with the wingmen. We are in number 12. Not a saucy book, though sometimes it does feel like it with the verbology they use, the verbiage. Valar liked that the touch of Fenor's totting up the wing strength. Okay, let me read that again. Valar liked that touch of Fenor's totting up the wing's strength, as if Vax were incapable of counting. Okay. Fenor had phrased it so adroitly as to make it impossible for Vax to protest the return insult. Lord Valar, Vax said through teeth fixed in a smile, the High Reaches are honored with your search. It will be to the credit of the High Reaches, Valar replied smoothly, if one of its own supplies the weir. To our everlasting credit, Vax replied as suavely. In the old days, many notable weirwomen came from my holds. Your holds? Asked Valar, politely smiling as he emphasized the plural. Ah, yes. You are now Overlord of Roatha, are you not? There have been many from that hold. A strange, tense look crossed Fax's face, quickly supplanted by a determined, affable grin. Fax stepped aside, gesturing Valar to enter the hold. Fax's troop leader barked a hasty order, and the men formed two lines. Their metal-edged boots flickered sparks from the stones. At unspoken orders, all the dragons rose with a great churning of air and dust. Valar strode nonchalantly past the welcoming files. The men were rolling their eyes in alarm as the beasts glided above to the inner courts. Someone on the high tower uttered a frightened yelp as Nement took his position on that vantage point. His great wings drove phosphoric-scented air across the inner court as he maneuvered his great frame onto the inadequate landing space. Outwardly, oblivious to the consternation, fear, and awe the dragons inspired, Valar was secretly amused and rather pleased by the effect. Lords of the holds needed this reminder that they still must deal with dragons, not just with riders, who were men, mortal and murderable. The ancient respect for dragon men, as well as dragonkind, must be reinstilled in modern breasts. The hold has just risen from table, Lord Valar, if... Vax suggested. His voice trailed off at Valar's smiling refusal. Convey my duty to your lady, Lord Vax, Valar rejoined, noticing with inward satisfaction the tightening of Fax's jaw muscles at the ceremonial request. Villar was enjoying himself thoroughly. He had not yet been born on the occasion of the last search, but one that ill-fatedly provided the incompetent Jorah. But he had studied the accounts of previous searches in the old records that had included subtle ways to confound those lords who preferred to keep their ladies sequestered when the dragon men rode. For Fax to refuse Villar the opportunity to pay his duty would have been tantamount to a major insult discharged only in mortal combat. You would prefer to see your quarters first, Fax countered. Villar flicked an imaginary speck from his soft warehide sleeve and shook his head. Duty first, he said with a rueful shrug. Of course. Fax all but snapped and strode smartly ahead, his heels pounding out the anger he could not express otherwise. Villar and Fëanor followed at a slower pace through the double-doored entry with greater metal panels. Where was I? Where's the panels? Oh, into the great hall, carved into the cliffside. The U-shaped table was being cleared by nervous servitors who rattled and dropped tableware as the two dragon men entered. Okay. The U-shaped table was being cleared by nervous servitors who rattled and dropped tableware as the two dragon men entered. Fax had already reached the far end of the hall and stood impatiently as the open slab door, the only access to the inner hold, which, like all such holds, burrowed deep into stone, the refuge of all in time of peril. They eat not badly, Fëanor remarked casually to Villar, appraising the remnants still on the table. Better than the weir, it would seem, Villar replied dryly, covering his speech with his hand as to not say, as he saw two drudged, staggering under the weight of a tray that bore a half-eaten carcass. Young and tender, Fëanor said in a bitter undertone, from the look of it, and while the stringy barren beasts are delivered up to us. Naturally. A pleasantly favored hall, Villar said amiably, as they reached Fax. Then, seeing Fax impatient to continue, Villar deliberately turned back to the banner-hung hall. He pointed out to Fëanor the deeply set slit windows, heavy bronze shutters, open to the bright noonday sky, facing east too, as they ought. That new hall at Telgar Hold actually faces south, I'm told. Tell me, Lord Fax, do you adhere to the old practices and mount a dawn guard? Dawn guard? Fax frowned, trying to parse Villar's meaning. There is always a guard at the tower. An easterly guard? Fax's eyes jerked towards the windows, then back, sliding across Villar's face to Fëanor and back again to the windows. There are always guards, he answered sharply, on all the approaches. Oh, just the approaches? And Villar turned to Fëanor and nodded wisely. Where else? Demanded Fax, concerned, glancing from one dragonman to the other. I must ask that of your harper. You do keep a trained harper in your hold? Of course. I have several trained harpers. Fax jerked his shoulders straighter. Villar affected not to understand. Lord Fax is the overlord of 6 holds, Fëanor reminded his wing leader. Wing leader? Wow. Just like Fourth Wing. Of course, Villar assented, with exactly the same inflection Fax had used a moment before. The mimicry did not go unnoticed by Fax, but as he was unable to construe deliberate insult out of an innocent affirmative, he stalked into the glow-lit corridors. The dragonmen followed. It is good to see one holder keeping so many ancient customs, Valar said to Fëanor, approvingly, for Fax's benefit, as they passed into the inner hold. There are many who have abandoned the safety of solid rock and enlarged their outer holds to dangerous proportions. I can't condone the risk myself. Their risk, Lord Valar, another's gain, Fax snorted derisively, slowing to a normal strut. Gain? How so? Any outer hold is easily penetrated. Bronze rider with trained forces, experienced leadership, and well-considered strategy. The man was not a braggart, Valar decided, nor in these peaceful days did he fail to mount tower guards. However, he kept within his hold, not out of obedience to ancient laws, but through prudence. He kept harbors for ostentation rather than because tradition required it, but he allowed the pits to decay. He permitted grass to grow. He accorded dragonmen the barest civility on one hand and offered veiled insult in the other. A man to be watched. The women's quarters in Fax's hold had been moved from the traditional innermost corridors to those at the cliff face. Sunlight poured down from the 3 double-shuttered deep casement windows in the outside wall. Fëanor noted that the bronze hinges were well oiled. The sills were the regulation spear length. Fax had not given in to the recent practice of diminishing the protective wall. The chamber, which richly hung with appropriately gentle scenes of women occupied in all manner of feminine tasks. Doors gave off the main chamber on both sides into smaller sleeping alcoves, and from these, at Fax's bidding, his women hesitantly emerged. Fax sternly gestured to a blue-gowned woman, her hair white-streaked, her face lined with disappointments and bitterness, her body swollen with pregnancy. She advanced awkwardly, stopping several feet from her lord. From her attitude, Valar deduced that she came no closer to Fax than was absolutely necessary. My lady, Valar hesitated. Oh, the Lady of Crom, mother of my heirs. Heirs? Years? Fax said without pride or cordiality. My lady, Valar hesitated, waiting for her name to be supplied. She glanced warily at her lord. Gemma, Fax snapped curtly. Valar bowed deeply. My lady Gemma. The weir is on search and requests the hospitality of the lord. My lord Valar, the Lady Gemma replied in a low voice, you are most welcome. Valar did not miss the slight slur on the adverb, or the fact that Gemma had no trouble naming him. His smile was warmer than the courtesy demanded, warm with gratitude and sympathy. Judging by the number of women in these quarters, Fax bedded well and frequently. There must be 1 or 2 Lady Gemma could bid farewell without regret. Fax went through the introductions, mumbling names until he realized the strategy was not going to work. Valar would politely beg the lady's name again. Fëanor, his smile brightened as he took heed which ladies Fax preferred to keep anonymous. Lounged indolently by the doorway. Valar would compare notes with him later, although on cursory examination there was none here worthy of the search. Fax preferred his women plump and small. There wasn't a saucy one on the lot. Wasn't there? If there once had been, the spirit had been beaten out of them. Fax, no doubt, was stud, not lover. Some of the covey had not all winter long made much use of water, judging from the amount of sweet oil gone rancid in their hair. Of them all, if these were all, the Lady Gemma was the only willful one, and she was too old. The amenities over, Fax ushered his unwelcome guests outside. Fëanor was excused by his wingleader to join the other dragon men. Fax peremptorily led the way to the quarters he had assigned the bronze rider. The chamber was on a low level, lower level than the women's suite, and was certainly adequate to the dignity of its occupant. The many-colored hangings were crowded with bloody battles, individual swordplay, bright-hued dragons in flight, firestones burning on the ridges, and all that Pern's scarlet-stained history offered. A pleasant room, Valar acknowledged, stripping off gloves and ware-hide tunic, throwing them carelessly to the table. I shall see to my men and the beasts. The dragons have all been fed recently, he commented, pointing up Fax's omission in inquiring. I request liberty to wander through the craft hold. Fax sourly granted what was traditionally a dragonman's privilege. I shall not further disrupt your routine, Lord Fax, for you must have many demands on you. With 7 holds to supervise. Valar inclined his body slightly to the Overlord, turning away as a gesture of dismissal. He could imagine the infuriated expression on Fax's face, and listened to the stamping retreat. He waited long enough to be sure Fax was out of the corridor, and then briskly retraced his steps to the great hall. Bustling drudges paused in setting up an additional trestle tables to eye the dragon men. He nodded pleasantly to them, looking to see if one of these females might possibly have the stuff of which we're women are made of. Overworked, underfed, scarred by lash and disease, they were just what they were, drudges, fit only for hard, menial labor. Fëanor and the men had settled themselves and hastily vacated barrack room. The dragons were perched comfortably on the rocky ridges above the hold. They had so arranged themselves that every segment of the wide valley fell under the scrutiny. All had been fed before leaving the weir, and each rider kept his dragon in light but alert charge. There would be no incidents on a search. As a group, the dragon men rose at Valar's entrance. No tricks, no troubles, but look around closely, he said, laconically. Return by sundown the names of any likely prospects. He caught Fëanor's grin, remembering how Fax had slurred over some names. Descriptions are in order and craft affiliation. The men nodded, and their eyes glinted with understanding. They were flatteringly confident of a successful search, even as Valar's doubts grew, now that he had seen all of Fax's women. By all logic, the pick of the High Reaches should be in Fax's chief hold, but they were not? Still, there were many large craft holds, not to mention the 6 other high holds to visit. All the same. In unspoken accord, Valar and Fëanor left the barracks. The men would follow, unobtrusively, in pairs or singly. The craft hold to reconnoiter the craft hold and the nearer farmholds. The men were as overtly eager to be abroad as Valar was privately. There had been a time when dragon men were frequently and favored guests in all the great holds throughout Pern, from southern Nerat to High Tillich. This pleasant custom, too, had died along with other observances, evidence of the low regard in which the weir was presently held. Valar vowed to correct this. He forced himself to trace in memory the insidious changes that the records which each weir woman kept were proof of the gradual but perceptible decline, traceable throughout the past 200 full turns. This guy is obviously a dingus. Yeah. Knowing the facts did not alleviate the condition, and Valar was of the scant handful of the weir itself who did credit to records and ballad alike. The situation might shortly reverse itself radically, and the old tales were to be believed, if they were. Excuse me. There was a reason, an explanation, a purpose, Valar felt, for every one of the weir laws. From first impression to the firestones, from the grass-free heights to ridge-running gutters, for elements as minor as controlling the appetite of a dragon to limiting the inhabitants of the weir, although why the other 5 weirs had been abandoned, Valar did not know. Idly, he wondered if there were records, dusty and crumbling, lodged in the disused weirs. He must contrive to check when next his wings flew patrol. Certainly, there was no explanation in Bendenweir. There was industry, but no enthusiasm, Fëanor was saying, drawing Valar's attention back to the tour of the craft hold. They had descended the guttered ramp from the hold into the craft hold proper, the broad roadway lined with cottages, up to the imposing stone craft halls. Silently, Valar noted moss-clogged gutters on the roofs, the vines clasping the walls. It was painful for one of his calling to witness the flagrant disregard of the simple safety precautions. Growing things were forbidden near the habitation of mankind. News travels fast, Fëanor chuckled, nodding at the hurrying craftsman in the smock of a baker, who gave them a mumbled good day. Not a female in sight. His observation was accurate. Women should be abroad at this hour, bringing in supplies from the storehouses, washing in the river on such a bright warm day, or going out to the farmholds to help with planting. Now, gowned figure. Not a gowned figure in sight. We used to be preferred mates, Fëanor remarked caustically. We'll visit the clothman's hall first, if memory serves me. As it always does, Fëanor injected wryly. He took no advantage of the blood relationship, but he was more at ease with the bronze rider than most of the dragon men, the other bronze riders included. Valar was reserved in a close-knit society of easy equality. He flew a tightly disciplined wing, but the men maneuvered to serve under him. His wing was excelled in the games. None ever floundered in between to disappear forever, and no beat in his wing sickened, leaving a man in dragonless exile from the weir, a part of him numb forever. The toll came this way and settled in one of the high reaches, Valar continued. Latol? Yes, a green rider from Salel's wing, you remember? An ill-timed swerve during the spring games had brought Latal and his beast into the full blast of a phosphine emission from Salel's bronze Twinth. Latal had been thrown from his beast's neck as the dragon tried to evade the blast. Another wingmate had scooped to catch the rider, but the green dragon, his left wing crisped, his body scorched, had died of shock and phosphine poisoning. Latal would aid our search, Benor agreed as the two dragonmen walked up to the bronze doors of the Clothman's Hall. They paused on this threshold, adjusted their eyes to the dimmer light within. Glows punctuated the wall recesses and hung in clusters above the larger rooms where the finer tapestries and fabrics were woven by master craftsmen. The pervaded mood was one of quiet, purposeful industry. Before their eyes had adapted, however, a figure glided to them, muttering a polite, if curt, request for them to follow him. They were led to the right of the entrance, to a small office curtained from the main hall. The guide turned to them, his face visible in the wall glows. There was that air about him that marked him indefinable as a dragonman, but his face was lined deeply. One side seamed with old burn marks. His eyes, sick with a hungry yearning, dominated his face. He blinked constantly. "I am now Latal," he said in a harsh voice. Falar nodded in acknowledgement. "You would be Falar," Latal said, "and you Fënor. You both have the look of your sire." Falar nodded again. Latal swallowed convulsively, the muscles in his face twitching as the presence of dragonsmen revived his awareness of exile. He essayed a smile. "Dragons in the sky!" The news spread faster than threads. "Nemorth has laid a female." "And Jorah dead?" Latal asked concernedly. His face cleared of its nervous movements for a second. "Hath flew her?" Falar nodded. Latal grimaced bitterly. "Urgul again, huh?" He stared off in the middle distance, his eyelids quiet, but the muscle along his jaw taking up the constant movements. "You have the high reaches, all of them?" Latal asked, turning back to the dragonman, a slight emphasis on all of them. Falar gave an affirmative nod again. "You've seen the women." Latal's disgust showed through the words. It was a statement, not a question, for he hurried on. "Well, there are no better in all the high reaches." His tone expressed uttermost disdain. He eased himself down to the heavy table that half filled one corner of the small room. His hands were clenched so tightly around the wide belt that secured the loose tunic to his body that the heavy leather was doubled. "You would almost expect the opposite, wouldn't you?" Latal continued. He was talking too much and too fast. It would have been insultingly rude in another, lesser man. It was the terrible loneliness of the man's exile from the Weir that drove him to garrulity. Latal skimmed the surfaces with hurried questions he himself answered rather than dip once into the matters too tender to be touched, such as his insatiable need for those of his kind. Yet he was giving the dragonmen exactly the information they needed. But Vax likes his women comfortably fleshed and docile, Latal rattled on. Even the Lady Gemma has learned. It's been difficult if he didn't need her family's support. It would be difficult indeed, so he keeps her pregnant, hoping to kill her in childbed one day. And he will, You will. Lytal's laughter grated unpleasantly. When Fax came to power, any man with wit sent his daughters down from the high reaches, or drew a brand across their faces. He paused. His countenance dark and bitter with memory, his eyes slits of hatred. I was a fool and thought my position gave me immunity. Lytal drew himself up, squaring his shoulders, turning full to the two dragonmen. His expression was vindicative, his voice low and tense. Kill the tyrant, dragonmen, for the sake and safety of Pern, of the Weir, of the Queen. He only bides his time. He spreads discontent among the other lords. Lytal's laughter had an hysterical edge to it now. He fancies himself as good as dragonmen. There are no candidates, then, in this hold? Valar said, his voice sharp enough to cut through the man's preoccupation with his curious theory. Lytal stared at the bronze rider. Did I not say it? The best either died under Fax or were sent away. What remains is nothing. Nothing. Weak-minded, ignorant, foolish, vapid. You have that with Jorah. The jaw snapped shut over his next words. He shook his head, scrubbing his face, to ease the anguish and despair. And the other holds? Lytal shook his head, frowning and darkly. The same. Either dead or fled. What of Ruathahol? What of Ruathahold? Lytal stopped shaking his head and looked sharply at Valar, his lips curling in a cunning smile. He laughed mirthlessly. You think to find a Taurian or a Moretta hidden at Ruathahold in these times? Well, Bronze Rider, all of Ruathan blood is dead. Fax's blade was thirsty that day. He knew the truth of those harper's tales, that Ruathan lords gave full measure of hospitality to the dragonmen, and the Ruathan were a breed apart. There were, you know, Lytal's voice dropped to a confiding whisper, exiled weirmen like myself in that line. Valar nodded gravely, unwilling to deprive the man of such a sop to his self-esteem. No, there is little, very little left in Roth the Valley. Lytal chuckled softly. Fax gets nothing from that hold but trouble. This reflection restored Lytal to a semblance of normal behavior, and his face twisted into a better humor. We of this hold are now the better clothmen in all Pern, and our smithies turn out better-tempered weapon. His eyes sparkled with pride in his adopted community. The conscripts from Ruatha tend to die of curious diseases or accidents, and the women Fax used to take? His laugh was nasty. It is rumored he was impotent for months after. Ooh. Valar's active mind jumped to a curious conclusion. There are none of the blood left? None. Any families in the holds with weir blood? Lytal frowned, glanced in surprise at Valar. He rubbed the scarred side of his face thoughtfully. There were, he admitted slowly. There were, but I doubt if any live on. He thought a moment longer, then shook his head, emphatically. There was such resistance at the invasion, and no quarter given. At the hold, Fax beheaded ladies as well as babes, and he imprisoned or executed any known to have carried arms for Ruatha. What a piece of shit. Valar shrugged. The idea had been a probability only. With such severe reprisals, Fax undoubtedly had eliminated the resistance as well as best craftsmen. That would account for the poor quality of Ruathan products, and the emergence of the High Reaches clothmen as the best in their trade. I wish I had better news for you, dragonmen. Nightal murmured. No matter, Valar reassured him, one hand poised to part the hanging in the doorway. Nightal came up to him swiftly, his voice urgent. Heed what I said about Fax's ambitions. Force Ragul, or whoever is Weir Leader next, to keep watch on the high reaches. Is Fax aware of your leanings? The haunted, hungry yearning crossed Lytal's face. He swallowed nervously, answering with no emotion in his voice. That would not signify if it suited the Lord of the High Reaches, but my guild protects me from persecution. I am safe enough in the craft. He is dependent on the proceeds of our industry, he snorted, mocking. I am the best weaver of battle scenes, to be sure, he added, cocking one eyebrow waggishly. Dragons are no longer woven in the fabrics as the comrades of heroes. You noticed, of course, the prevalence of growing greens? Valar grimaced his distaste. That is not all we have noted either, but Fax keeps the other traditions. Lytal waved this consideration aside. He does that because it is basic military sense. His neighbors armed after he took Ruatha, for he did it by treachery, let me tell you. And let me warn you also, Lytal jabbed a finger in the direction of the hold. He scoffs openly at tales of the threads. He taunts the harpers for the stupid nonsense of the old ballads, and has banned from their repertoire all dragon lore. The new generation will grow up totally ignorant of duty, tradition, and precaution. Valar was not surprised to hear that on top of Lytal's other disclosures, although it disturbed him more than anything else he heard. Other men, too, denied the verbal transmission of heroic events, accounting them no more to the maunderings of harpers. Yet the red star pulsed in the sky, and the time was drawing near when they would hysterically reavow the old allegiances in fear of their very lives. Have you been abroad in the early mornings of late? Asked Fëanor, grinning maliciously. I have, Lytal breathed out in a hushed, choked whisper. I have. A groan was wrenched from his guts, and he whirled away. From the dragon men, his head bowed between hunched shoulders. Go, he said, gritting his teeth. And as they hesitated, he pleaded, Go! Valar walked quickly from the room, followed by Fëanor. The bronze rider crossed the quiet, dim hall with long strides and exploded into the startling sunlight. His momentum took him to the center of the square, and he stopped so abruptly that Fëanor, hard on his heels, nearly collided with him. We will spend exactly the same time within the other halls, he announced in a tight voice. His face averted from Fëanor's eyes. Valar's throat was constricted. It was difficult suddenly for him to speak. He swallowed hard several times. To be dragonless, murmured Fëanor pityingly. The encounter with Lytal had roiled his depths in a mournful way to which he was unaccustomed. That Valar appeared equally shaken went far to dispel Fëanor's private opinion that his half-brother was incapable of emotion. There is no other way once first impression has been made. You know that, Valar roused himself to say curtly. He strode off to the hall, bearing the Leatherman's device. Honor those dragons, Heed, in thought and favor, word and deed. Worlds are lost, or worlds are saved. From those dangers dragon braved. Dragon man, avoid excess. Greed will bring the weir distress. To the ancient laws adhere. Prospers thus the dragon weir. Along with chapters. Okay. I think it gets good. Forgot how long the intro was. Oh, we're not that far in. This is only page 20. Valar was amused and unamused. This was their 4th day in Fax's company, and only Valar's firm control on self and Wing was keeping the situation from exploding into violence. It had been a turn of chance, Valar mused, as Nemeth held his leisurely glide towards the Breast Pass into Roatha, that he, Valar, had chosen the high reaches. Fax's tactics would have been successful with Rugul, who was very conscious of his honor, or Salan or Denol, who were too young to have developed much patience or discretion. Salel would have retreated in confusion, a course nearly as disastrous for the Weir as combat. He should have correlated the indications long ago. The decay of the Weir and its influence did not come solely from the holding lords and their folk. It came also from within the Weir, a result of inferior queens and incompetent Weir women. It came from Rugul's inexplicable insistence on not bothering the holders, on keeping dragon men within the Weir. And yet, within the Weir, there had been too much emphasis on preparation for the games, until the internal competition between wings had become the be-all and end-all of Weir activity. The encroachment of grass had not come overnight, nor had the lords awakened one morning recently and decided in a flash not to give all their traditional tithe to the Weir. It had happened gradually and had been allowed by the Weir to continue, until the purpose and reason of the Weir and dragonkind had reached this low ebb, where an upstart collateral here to an ancient hold could be so contemptuous of the dragon men and the simple basic precautions that kept Pern free of threats. Valar doubted that Fax would have attempted such a program of aggression against neighboring holds if the Weir had maintained its old prominence. Each hold must have its lord to protect valley and folk from the threats. One hold, one lord, not one lord claiming 7 holds. That was against ancient tradition and evil besides, for how well can one man protect 7 valleys at once? Man, except for dragon men, can be in only one place at a time, and unless a man was dragon mounted, it took hours to get from one hold to another. No Weirman of old would have permitted such flagrant disregard of ancient ways. Valar saw the goats of flame along the barren heights of the pass, and Nemeth obediently altered his glide for a better view. Valar had sent half the wing ahead of the main cavalcade. It was a good training for them to skim irregular terrain. He had issued small pieces of firestone with instructions to sear any growths as practice. It would do to remind Fax as well as his troops of the awesome ability of dragonkind, a phenomenon the common folk of Pern appeared to have all but forgotten. Welcome, Atlas! We're reading Pern. This is Dragonflight, book 1. Well, thank you for subscribing. 18 months. Wow. Had to burp. Excuse me. It would do to remind Fax as well as his troops of the awesome ability of dragonkind, a phenomenon the common folk of Pern appeared to have all but forgotten. the fiery phosphine emissions as the dragons belched forth gases. Relatable. Showed the pattern well flown. Ragul could argue against the necessity of firestone drills. He could cite such incidents that which had exiled Lytal, but Valar kept the tradition. And so did every man who flew with him, or they left the wing. None failed him. Valar knew that the men reveled as much as he did in the fiery joy of riding a flaming dragon. The fumes of phosphine were exhilarating on their own way, and the feeling of power that surged through the man who controlled the might and majesty of a dragon had no parallel in human experience. Dragon riders were forever men apart once first impression had been made, and to ride a fighting dragon, blue, green, bronze, or brown, was worth the risks. The unending alertness, the isolation from the rest of mankind. Nementh dipped his wings obliquely to slide through the narrow cleft of the pass that led from Crom to Ruatha. No sooner had they emerged from the cut than the difference between the two holds was patent. Flar was stunned. Could say Flar was floored. Through the last 4 holds, he had been sure that the end of the search lay with Ruatha. There had been that little brunette whose father was a clothman in Nepal, and the tall willowy girl with enormous eyes, the daughter of a minor warder in Crom, yet these were possibilities, and had Valar been Salel or Kinet or Denol, he might have taken the 2 in as potential mates, although not likely weirwomen. But throughout he had assured himself that the real choice would be found to the south. Now he gazed on the ruin that was Ruatha, his hopes dispersed. Below him, he saw Fax's banner dip in the sequence that requested his presence. Mastering the crushing disappointment he felt, he directed Nementh to descend. Fax, roughly controlling the terrified plunging of his earthbound mount, waved down into the abandoned-looking valley. "Behold, a great Ruatha of which you had such hopes," he enjoined sarcastically. Valar smiled coolly back, wondering how Fax had divined that. Had Valar been so transparent when he suggested searching the other holes? Or was it a lucky guess on Fax's part? One sees at a glance why goods from the high reaches are now preferred. Valar made himself a reply. Meneth rumbled, and Valar called him sharply to order. The bronze one had developed a distaste bordering on hatred for Fax. Such antipathy in a dragon was most unusual, and of no small concern to Valar, now that he would have in the least regretted Fax's demise, but not at Nementh's breath. "Little good comes from Ruatha," Fax said in a voice that was close to a snarl. He jerked sharply at the bridle of his beast, and fresh blood colored the foam on its muzzle. The creature threw its head backward to ease the painful bar in its mouth, and Fax savagely smote it in a blow between the ears. The blow, Valar observed, was not intended for the poor, protesting beast, but for the sight of unproductive Ruatha. "I am the Overlord. My proclamation went unchallenged by any of the blood. I am in my rights. Ruatha must pay its tribute to its legal overlord." "And hunger for the rest of the year," Valar remarked dryly, gazing out over the wide valley. Few of its fields were plowed. Its pastures supported meager herds. Even its orchards looked stunted. Blossoms that had been so profuse on trees in Crom the next valley over were sparse, as if reluctant to flower in so dismal a place. Although the sun was up, there seemed to be no activity in the farmholds, or none near enough to be observed. The atmosphere was one of sullen despair. There has been resistance to my rule of Ruatha. Valar shot a look at Fax, but the man's voice was fierce, his face bleak, auguring further unpleasantness for Ruathan rebels. The vindicativeness that colored Fax's attitude towards Ruatha and its rebels was tinged with another strong emotion, which Valar had been able to identify, but which had been very apparent to him from the first time he had adroitly suggested this tour of the holds. He could not be fear, for Fax was clearly fearless and obnoxiously self-assured. Revulsion? Dread? Uncertainty? Valar could not label the nature of Fax's compound reluctance to visit Ruatha, but the man had not relished this prospect, and now reacted violently to being within these disturbing boundaries. How foolish of the Ruathans, Valar remarked amiably. Fax swung around on him, one hand poised above his sword hilt, eyes blazing. Valar anticipated with a feeling close to pleasure that the usurper Fax might actually draw on a dragon man. Right? Very evil. He was almost disappointed when the man controlled himself, took a firm hold on the reins of his mount, and kicked it forward to a frantic run. I shall kill him yet, Valar said to himself, and Nementh spread his wings in concord. Fëanor dropped beside his bronze leader. Did I see him about to draw on you? Fëanor's eyes were bright, his smile acid, until he remembered I was mounted on a dragon. Watch him, Bronze Rider. He means to kill you soon. If he can. He's considered a vicious fighter, Fëanor advised, his smile gone. Nementh flapped his wings again, and Valar absently stroked the great soft-skinned neck. I am at some disadvantage? Valar asked, stung by Fëanor's words. To my knowledge, no, Fëanor said quickly, startled. I have not seen him in action, but I don't like what I have heard. He kills often, with and without cause. And because we dragon men do not seek blood, we are not to be feared as fighters. I snapped, Valar. Are you ashamed of being what you were bred? I know. Fëanor sucked in his breath at the tone of his leader's voice. And others of our wing know. But there is that in the attitude of Fax's men that makes me wish some excuse to fight. As you remarked, we will probably have that fight. There is something here in Ruatha that unnerves our noble overlord. Nementh and now Canth, Fëanor's brown, extended their wings, flapping to catch their rider's attention. Valar stared at the dragon, slewed his head back towards his rider, their great eyes gleaming like sun-struck opals. There is a subtle strength in this valley, Valar murmured, gathering the import of a dragon's agitated message. Strength indeed. Even my brown feels it, Fëanor replied, his face lighting. Careful, Brown Rider, Valar cautioned. Carefully. Careful. Send the entire wing aloft. Search this valley. I should have realized. I should have suspected that it was all there to be evaluated. What fools have dragon men become? The hold is barred. The hall is bare, and men vanish. The soil is barren, the rock is bald, all hope banish. Lessa was shoveling ashes from the hearth when the agitated messenger staggered into the great hall. She made herself as inconspicuous as possible so the warder would not dismiss her. She had contrived to be sent to the great hall that morning, knowing that the warder intended to brutalize the head clothman for the shoddy quality of the goods readied for shipment to Fax. "Fax is coming! With dragon men!" the men gasped out as he plunged into the dim great hall. The warder, who had been about to lash the head clothman, turned, stunned, from his victim. The courier, a farmholder from the edge of Ruatha, stumbled up to the warder so excited with his message that he grabbed the warden's arm. "How dare you leave your hold?" The warder had aimed his lash at the astonished holder. The force out of the first blow knocked the man from his feet. Yelping, he scrambled out of the reach of a second lashing. Dragonmen indeed! Fax! Ha! He shuns Ruatha. There! The warder punctuated each denial with another blow, kicking the helpless wretch for good measure before he turned breathless to glare at the clothman and the two underwarders. How did he get in here with such a threadbare lie? The warder stalked to the great hall door. It was flung open, just as he reached for the iron handle. The ashen-faced guard officer rushed in, nearly knocking the warder down. It does feel present, doesn't it? Oh. Dragon men, dragons, all over Ruatha. The man shivered, arms flailing wildly. He, too, pulled at the warder's arm, dragging the stupefied official toward the outer courtyard to bear out the truth of his statement. Lessa scooped up the last pile of ashes. Picking up her equipment, she slipped out to the great hall. There was a very pleased smile on her face under the screen of matted hair. A dragon man at Ruatha? An opportunity. She must somehow contrive to get Fax so humiliated or so infuriated that he would renounce his claim to the hold in the presence of a dragon man. Then she could claim her birthright. But she would have to be extraordinarily wary. Dragon riders were men apart. Anger did not cloud their intelligence. Greed did not sully their judgment. Fear did not dull their reactions. Let the dense-witted believe human sacrifice, unnatural lusts, insane revels. She was not so gullible, and those stories weren't against her grain. Dragon men were still human, and there was wereblood in her veins. It was the same color blood as that of anyone else. Enough of hers had been spilled to prove that. She halted for a moment, catching a sudden shallow breath. Was this danger she had sensed 4 days ago, at dawn, the final encounter in her struggle to retain the hold? No, Lessa cautioned herself. There was more to that portent than revenge. The ash bucket banged against her shins as she shuffled down the low-ceiling corridor to the stable door. Fax would find a cold welcome. She had lain no new fire on the hearth. Her laugh echoed back unpleasantly from the damp walls. She rested her bucket and propped her broom and shovel as she wrestled with the heavy bronze door that gave into the new stables. They had been built outside of the cliff of Ruatha by Fax's first warder, a subtler man than all 8 of his successors. He had achieved more than all the others, and Lessa had honestly regretted the necessity of his death, but he would have made her revenge impossible. He would have found her out before she had learned how to camouflage herself and her little interferences. What had his name been? she could not recall, well, she regretted his death. The second man had been properly greedy, and it had been easy to set up a pattern of misunderstanding between warder and craftsman. That one had been determined to squeeze all profit from Ruathan goods, so that some of it would drop into his pocket before Fax suspected a shortage. The craftsman, who had begun to accept the skillful diplomacy of the first warder, bitterly resented the second grasping, high-handed ways. They resented the passing of the old line and, even more so, of the way of its passing. They were unforgiving of the insult to Roatha, its now secondary position in the high reaches, and they resented the individual indignities that holders, craftsmen, and farmers alike suffered under the second warder. It took little manipulation to arrange for matters at Roatha to go from bad to worse. She's very tricky. The second was replaced, and his successor fared no better. He was caught diverting goods, the best of the goods at that. Fax had had him executed. His bony head still rolled around in the main fireplace above the great tower. The present incumbent had not been able to maintain the holding, and even the sorry conditions in which he had assumed its management. Seemingly simple matters developed rapidly into disasters, like the production of cloth. Contrary to his boasts to Fax, the quality had not improved, and the quality had fallen off. Now Fax was here, and with dragonmen. Why? The import of the question froze Lessa, and the heavy door closing behind her barked her heels painfully. Dragonmen used to be frequent visitors at Ruatha. That she knew, and even vaguely remembered. Those memories were like a harper's tale told of someone else, not something within her own experience. What are you getting at, Orion? She had limited her fierce attention to Ruatha only. She could not even recall the name of queen or weirwomen from the instructions of her childhood, nor could she recall hearing mention of any queen or weirwoman by anyone in the hold these past 10 turns. Perhaps the dragon's men were finally going to call the lords of the holds task for the disgraceful show of greenery about the holds. Well, Lessa was to blame for much of that in Ruatha, but she defied even a dragonman to confront her with her guilt. If all Ruatha fell to the threads, it would be better than remaining dependent to Fax. Heresy shocked Lessa, even as she thought it. Regal, but brutal in getting her goals. God forbid a woman does anything. Yeah, exactly. Wishing she could as easily unburden her conscience of such blasphemy, she ditched the ashes on the stable midden. There was a sudden change in air pressure around her. Then a fleeting shadow caused her to glance up. From behind the cliff above glided a dragon. Its enormous wings spread to the fullest as he caught the morning updraft. Turning effortlessly, he descended. A second, a third, a full wing of dragons followed in soundless flight and patterned descent, graceful and awesome. The klaxon rang belated from the tower, and from within the kitchen there issued the screams and shrieks of the terrified drudges. Okay. Lessa took cover. She ducked into the kitchen, where she was instantly seized by the assistant cook and thrust with a buffet and a kick towards the sink. There she was put to scrubbing in grease-crusted serving utensils with cleansing sand. The yelping canines were already lashed to the spit run, turning a scrawny herd beast that had been set to roast. The cook was ladling seasonings on the carcass, swearing at having to offer so poor a meal to so many guests, some of them of high rank. Winter-dried fruits from the last scanty harvest had to be set to soak, and 2 of the oldest drudges were scraping roots to be boiled. An apprentice cook was kneading bread, and another carefully spicing a sauce. Looking fixedly at him, Lessa diverted his hand from one spice box to a less appropriate one as he gave a final shake to the concoction. She innocently added too much wood to the wall, over to ensure the ruins of the bread. Evil. She controlled the canines deftly, slowing one and speeding the other so that the meat would be underdone on one side, burnt on the other. Rude. Then the feast should result in fast, with the food presented found inedible. It was her whole intention. Above in the hold, she had no doubt that certain other measures undertaken at different times for this exact contingency were being discovered. Her fingers bloodied from a beating. One of the warden's women came shrieking into the kitchen, hopefully in refuge there. Insects have eaten the best blankets to shreds, and a canine who had littered on one of the best linen snarled at me as she gave suck. What does that mean? and the rushes. Wait. Is she saying all this? Okay. And the rushes are noxious, and the best chambers full of debris, driven by the winter wind. Somebody left the shutters ajar. Just a tiny bit, but it was enough, the woman wailed, clutching her hand to her breast, rocking back and forth. Lessa bent with great industry to shine the plates. Watch where, in your lair. Watch well, watch where, who goes there? The watch where is hiding something, Falar told Fëanor, as they consulted in the hastily cleaned great chamber. The room delighted to hold the wintry chill, although the generous fire now burned on the hearth. It was but gibbering when Kant spoke to it, Fëanor remarked. He was leaning against the mantel, turning slightly from side to side to gain some warmth. He watched his wing leader's impatient pacing. The menth is calming it down, Falar replied. May be able to sort out the nightmare. The creature may be more senile than sane, but I doubt it, Fëanor concurred helpfully. He glanced with apprehension up at the web-hung ceiling. He was certain he'd found most of the crawlers, but he didn't fancy their sting. Not on top of the discomforts already experienced in this forsaken hold. If the night stayed mild, he intended curling up with Kant in the heights. That would be a more reasonable suggestion than Fax or his warder have made. Falar muttered, frowning at the brown rider. Well, it's unbelievable that Ruatha could have fallen into such disrepair in 10 short turns. Every dragon caught the feeling of power, and it's obvious to the watchwear has been tampered with. That takes a good deal of control. Or someone of the blood, Falar reminded him. Fëanor shot his wing leader a quick look, wondering if he could possibly be serious in the light of all information to the contrary. I grant you there is power here, Falar, Fëanor conceded, but it could as easily be a hidden male bastard of the old blood, and we need a female. But Fax made it plain in his inimitable fashion that he left none of the old blood alive in the hold the day he took it. Ladies, children, all, no. The brown rider shook his head as if he could dispel the lack of faith in his wing leader's curious insistence that the search would end in Ruatha with Ruathan blood. That watchweir is hiding something, and only someone of the blood of its hold can arrange that, brown rider, Pilar said emphatically. He gestured around the room and towards the window. Ruatha has been overcome, but she resists. Subtly. I say it points to the old blood and power, not power alone. The obstinate expression in Flar's eyes, the set of his jaw, suggests that Fëanor seek another topic. I'll see what may be seen around fallen Ratha, he mumbles, and left the chamber. Fëanor was heartily bored with the Lady Fax had so courteously assigned him. Heartily bored. She giggled incessantly and sneezed constantly. She waved about, but did not apply to her nose a scarf or handkerchief long overdue for a thorough washing. A sour odor, compounded of sweat, sweet oil, and rancid food smells, exuded from her. She was also pregnant by Fax, not obviously so, but she had confided her condition to Fëanor, either oblivious to the insult to the dragonmen or directed by her lord to let drop the information. Fëanor deliberately ignored the matter, and, except when her company was obligatory on the search journey, had ignored her too. Lady Tella was nervously jabbering away at him about... where'd it go? About the terrible condition of the rooms to which Lady Gemma and the other ladies of the Lord's procession had been assigned. The shutters, both sets, were ajar all winter long, and you should have seen the trash on the floors. We finally got 2 of the drudges to sweep it all into the fireplace. And then that smoked something fearful till a man was sent up. Lady Tilla giggled. He found the access blocked by a chimney stone fallen aslant. The rest of the chimney, for a wonder, was in good repair. She waved her handkerchief. Fëanor held his breath as the gesture wafted an unappealing odor in his direction. He glanced up at the hall towards the inner hold door and saw the Lady Gemma descending, her steps slow and awkward. Some subtle difference about her gait attracted him, and he stared at her, trying to identify it. Oh yes, poor Lady Gemma, Lady Tilla babbled, sighing deeply. We are so concerned. Why my Lord Fax insisted on her coming I do not know. She is not near her time, and yet... The light head's concern sounded sincere. Oh shit, it's Raymoth? What's a Raymoth? What? Fëanor's incipient hatred for Fax and his brutality matured abruptly. He left his partner chatting to thin air and courteously extended his arm to the Lady Gemma to support her down the steps and to the table. Only the brief tightening of her fingers on his forearm betrayed her gratitude. Her face was very white and drawn. The lines, deeply etched around her mouth and eyes, showed the effort she was expending. Some attempt has been made, I see, to restore order to the hall, she remarked, in a conversational tone. Some, Fëanor admitted dryly, glancing around the grandly proportioned hall, its rafters festooned with the webs of many terns. The inhabitants of those gossamer nests dropped from time to time, with ripe splats, to the floor, onto the table, and into the serving platters. Nothing replaced the old banners of the Ruathan blood removed from the stark brown stone walls. Fresh rushes did obscene the greasy flagstones. The trestle tables appeared recently sanded and scraped, and the platters gleamed dully in the refreshed glow. Those, unfortunately, were a mistake, for brightness was much too unflattering to a scene that would have been more reassuring in dimmer light. This was such a graceful hall, the Lady Gemma murmured for Flair's ears alone. You were a friend? He asked politely. Yes, in my youth. Remoth hasn't been born yet? Oh, shit. Okay. Great. Spoilers! Get out of here, Snagger. Her voice dropped expressively on the last word, evoking for Falar a happier girlhood. It was a noble line. I think one might have escaped the sword? Think you one might have escaped the sword? The Lady Gemma flashed him a startled look, then quickly composed her features, lest the exchange be noted. She gave a barely perceptible shake of the head, then shifted her awkward weight to take her place at the table. Graciously, she inclined her head toward Falar, both dismissing and thanking him. He returned to his own partner and placed her at the table on his left. As the only person of rank who would dine that night at Rothahold, Lady Gemma was seated on his right. Fax would be beyond her. The dragonmen and Fax's upper soldiery would sit at the lower tables. No guildman had been invited to Ruatha. Fax arrived just then with his current lady and 2 underleaders, the warder bowing them effusively into the hall. The man, Falar noticed, kept a good distance from his overlord, as well as warder, whose responsibility was in this sorry condition. Falar flicked a crawler away. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Lady Gemma wince and shudder. Stamped up to the raised table, his face blank with suppressed rage. He pulled back his chair roughly, slamming it into the Lady Gemma's before he seated himself. He pulled the chair to the table with a force that threatened to rock the none too stable trestle top from its supporting legs. Scowling, he inspected his goblet and plate, fingering the surface, ready to throw them aside as if they displeased him. A roast, my Lord Fax, and fresh bread, Lord Fax, and such fruits and roots as are left. Left? Left? You said there was nothing harvested here. The warder's eyes bulged, and he gulped, stammering, Nothing to be sent on, nothing good enough to be sent on, nothing. Had I but known of your arrival, I could have sent to Crom. Sent to Crom, roared Fax, slamming the plate he was inspecting on the table so forcefully that the rim bent under his hands. The warder winced again, as if he himself had been maimed. Alright, sent to Crom. Okay. Okay, good. It's okay? It's okay? Okay. For decent foodstuffs, my lord, he quavered. The day one of my holds cannot support itself, or the visit of its rightful lord, I shall renounce it. The Lady Gemma gasped. Simultaneously, the dragons roared. Falar felt the unmistakable surge of power. His eyes instinctively sought Fëanor at the lower table. The brown rider, all the dragonmen had experienced an inexplicable shaft of exultation. What's wrong, dragonman? Snapped Fax. Falar, affecting unconcern, stretched his legs under the table and assumed an indolent posture in the heavy chair. Wrong? The dragons! Oh, nothing. They often roar. At the sunsets, at a flock of passing wearies. At mealtimes. And Falar smiled amiably at the lord of the high reaches. Beside him, his table-mate gave a little squeak. Mealtimes? Have they not been fed? Oh, yes. 5 days ago. Oh, 5 days ago? And are they hungry now? Her voice trailed into a whisper of fear. Her eyes grew round. In a few days, Falar assured her, under cover of his detached amusement. Falar scanned the hall, That surge had come from nearby, either in the hall or just within it, without it. It must have been from within. It came so soon upon Fax's speech that his words must have triggered it. Flar saw that Fënor and the other dragonmen were surreptitiously searching every face in the hall. Fax's soldiers could be disqualified and the warder's men, and the power had an indefinable feminine touch to it. One of Fax's women? Fëlar found that hard to credit. Nementh had been close to all of them, and none had shown a vestige of power, much less... Ooh. Book is heavy. Much less, with the exception of Lady Gemma, and any intelligence. One of the hall women? So far, he had seen only sorry drudges and the aging females the warder had as a housekeeper. The warder's personal women? He must discover if that man had one of the hold guard's women? Fëlar suppressed an intense desire to rise and search. You mount a guard? He asked Fax casually. Double at Rotha Hold, he was told in a tight, hard voice. Ground out from somewhere deep in Fax's chest. Here? Fëlar all but laughed out loud, gesturing around the sad, appointed chamber. Here! Fax changed the subject with a roar. Food! 5 drudges, 2 of them women in such grimy brown-gray rags that Fëlar hoped they had nothing to do with the preparation of the meal, staggered in under the unplattered herdebeest. Unplattered. Oh, the unplattered. Okay, it's got a platter. No one with so much as a trace of power would sink to such depths, unless... The aroma that reached him as the platter was placed on the serving table distracted him. It reeked of singed bone and charred meat. Even the pitcher of cla being passed smelled bad. The warder frantically sharpened his tools, as if a keen edge could somehow slice acceptable portions from this unlikely carcass. The Lady Gemma caught her breath again, and Fëlar saw her hands curled tightly around the armrest. He saw the convulsive movement of her throat as she swallowed. He, too, did not look forward to this repast. The drudges reappeared with wooden trays of bread. Burnt crusts had been scraped and cut in some places from the loaves before serving. As other trays were borne in, Fëlar tried to catch sight of the faces of the servitors. Matted hair obscured the faces of one who presented Lady Gemma with a dish of legumes swimming in greasy liquid. Revolted, Fëlar poked through the legumes to find a properly cooked portion to offer to Lady Gemma. She waved them aside, her face ill concealing her discomfort. As Fëlar was about to turn and serve Lady Teyla, he saw Lady Gemma's hand clutch convulsively at the chair arms. Oh, he realized that she was not merely nauseated by the unappetizing food, she was seized with the onslaught of labor contractions. Fëlar glanced in Fax's direction. The Overlord was scowling blackly at the attempts of the warders to find edible portions of meat to serve. Fëlar touched Lady Gemma's arm with light fingers. She turned her face just enough so that she could see Fëlar out of the corner of her eyes. She managed a socially correct half-smile. "I dare not leave just now, Lord Fëlar. He is always dangerous at Ruatha, and it may only be false pangs at my age." Fëlar was dubious as he saw another shudder pass through her frame. The women The woman would have been a fine werewoman, and he thought ruefully as if she was younger. The warder, his hands shaking, presented Fax the sliced meats, slivers of overdone flesh, portions of almost edible meats, but not much of either. Hi, Darren, welcome. One furious wave of Fax's broad fist, and the warder had the plate, meats, and juice square in the face. Despite himself, Valar sighed. For those undoubtedly constituted the only edible portions of the entire beast. Call this food? Call this food? Fax bellowed. His voice boomed back from the bare vault of the ceiling, shaking crawlers from the webs. The sound shattered the fragile strands. Slop! Slop! I never understood how she got the meat to be half burnt, half raw. Well, I mean, they kind of explained it, but I don't think we're supposed to think about it too hard. Valar rapidly brushed crawlers from the Lady Gemma, who was helpless in the throes of a very strong contraction. It's all we had on short notice, the warder squealed, bloody juices streaking down his cheeks. Fax threw the goblet at him, and the wine went streaming down the man's chest. The streaming dish of roots followed, and the man yelped as the hot liquid splashed over him. My lord, I had but known. Obviously, Ruatha cannot support the visit of its lord. He must renounce it, Valar heard himself saying. His shock at such words issuing from his mouth was as great as that of everyone else in the hall. Silence fell, broken by the splat of crawlers and the drip of root liquid from the warder's shoulders to the rushes. The grating of Fax's boot heel was clearly audible as he swung slowly around to face the bronze rider. As Valar conquered his own amazement and rapidly tried to predict what to do next to mend matters, he saw Fëanor rise slowly to his feet, hand on dagger hilt. I did not hear you correctly? Fax asked, his face a blank of all expression, his eyes snapping. Unable to comprehend how he could have uttered such an errant challenge, Valar managed to assume a languid pose. You did mention, my lord, he drawled, that if any of your holds could not support it, and the visit of its rightful overlord, you would renounce it. Fax stared back at Valar, his face a study of swiftly suppressed emotions, the glint of triumph dominant. Valar, his face stiff, with the forced expression of indifference, was casting swiftly about in his mind. In the name of the egg, had he lost all sense of discretion? Pretending utter unconcern, he stabbed some vegetables onto his knife and began to munch on them. As he did so, he noticed Fëanor glancing slowly around the hall, scrutinizing everyone. Abruptly, Valar realized what had happened. Somehow, in making that statement, he, a dragonman, had responded to a covert use of the power. Valar, the bronze rider, was being put into a position where he would have to fight Fax. Why? For what end? To get Fax to renounce the hold? Incredible, but there could be only one possible reach for such a turn of events. An exultation as sharp as pain swelled within Valar. It was all he could do to maintain his pose of bored indifference, all he could do to turn his attention to thwarting Fax should he press for a duel. A duel would serve no purpose. He, Valar, had no time to waste on it. A groan escaped Lady Gemma, and broke the eye-locked stance of the two antagonists. Irritated, Fax looked down at her, fist clenched and half raised to strike her for her temerity at interrupting her lord and master. The contraction that rippled across the swollen belly was as obvious as the woman's pain. Lar dared not look toward her, but he wondered if she had deliberately groaned aloud to break the tension. Incredibly, Fax began to laugh. He threw back his head, showing big stained teeth, and roared. "I renounce it in favor of her issue. If it is male and lives," he crowed, laughing raucously. Heard and witnessed, Vlar snapped, jumping to his feet and pointing to his riders. They were on their feet in an instant. Heard and witnessed, they averred, in the traditional manner. With the moment, everyone began to babble at once in nervous relief. The other women, each reacting in her way to the imminence of birth, called orders to the servants and advice to each other. They converged towards the Lady Gemma, hovering undecidedly out of Fax's range like silly wearies, disturbed from their roosts. It was obvious that they were torn between their fear of the Lord and their desire to reach the laboring woman. He gathered their intentions as well as their reluctance, and still stridently laughing, knocked back his chair. He stepped over it, strode down to the meat stand, and stood hacking off pieces with his knife, stuffing them, juice dripping, in his mouth without ceasing to guffaw. As Valar bent toward the Lady Gemma to assist her out of her chair, she grabbed his arm urgently. Their eyes met, hers clouded with pain. She pulled him closer. "He means to kill you, Bronze Rider. He loves to kill," she whispered. "Dragon men are not easily killed, brave lady. I am grateful to you." "I do not want you killed," she said softly, biting at her lip. "We have so few Bronze Riders." Valar stared at her, startled. Did she, Fax's lady, actually believe in the old laws? He beckoned to two of the warder's men to carry her up to the hold. He caught Lady Tilla by the arm as she fluttered past him in the wake. "What do you need?" Oh, she exclaimed, her face twisted with panic. She was distractedly wringing her hands. Water, hot, clean, cloths, and a birthing woman. Oh yes, we must have a birthing woman. Valar looked about for one of the hold women, his glance sliding over the first disreputable figure who had started to mop up the spilled food. He signaled instead for the warder and peremptorily ordered him to send for the birthing woman. The warder kicked at the drudge on the floor. You, whatever your name is, go get her from the craft hold. You must know who she is." With a nimbleness at odds with her appearance of extreme age and discrepitude, the drudge evaded the parting kick. The warder aimed in her direction. She scurried across the hall and out the kitchen door. Fax sliced and speared meat, occasionally bursting out with a loud bark of laughter. As his thoughts amused him, Valar sauntered down to the carcass and, without waiting for an invitation from his host, began to carve neat slices also, beckoning his men over. Fax's soldiers, however, waited till the lord had eaten their fill. "Lord of the Hold, your charge is sure, and thick walls, metal doors, and no verdure." It's 10:06. Enjoy, guys. Thank you so much for being here. I'm gonna go watch some anime. I hope you enjoyed the story. Next time we'll read some more. Goodbye.